actually get started because I know you have a lot to cover. So let's just jump in. So I want to welcome everyone today. I'm Christine Robertson, the Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff for the Eastern Minority Supplier Development Council and a Program Manager for the Aramark Centers of Excellence, along with Melissa Ignacio, who you will hear from later in the program. I want to thank Aramark for looking to the Eastern MSDC and Southern California MSDC to bring the Centers of Excellence program to our MBEs. So far, you have met with your Aramark executive coaches and peer mentors, engaged with fellow cohort members, and gained new insights and knowledge from professors and Aramark subject matter experts. And today is no different. You'll get a look at project management from Ray Berlinghieri, Vice President of the Partnership Activation and the Project Management Office charged with activating new accounts and building out Aramark's current business and strategic initiatives. Ray joined Aramark in 1996 after working in the financial industry. His background with Aramark includes leadership positions in growth, strategic initiatives, and finance across multiple lines of business. He brings to the team skills of negotiation, team building, leadership of cross-functional teams, project management, and motivation. Ray is responsible for leading overall transitions, startups, and transformation strategies for food and facilities businesses to ensure long-standing partnerships. Additionally, he leads a team of high-performing project managers and field operators, designed to deliver extraordinary collaboration and partnership for seamless openings for both the client and Aramark that enhance the transparency to maximize productivity and performance. Two of his team members are with him today, and Ray will introduce them to you himself. But first, a little about Ray, the person, from his extensive bio. Ray and his family are deeply involved in their community, where Ray sat on the Governor's Advisory Board for Exceptional Citizens. He, his wife, daughters, and son, who has a rare genetic disability, have presented about the joys and challenges of special needs to advocacy groups, students, and faculty at universities, at fundraising events, and for other audiences. In fact, Ray is the inaugural co-chair and developed Thrive, an Aramark employee resource group dedicated to employees with special needs and their caretakers, which he considers one of his proudest professional accomplishments. Thanks, Ray, for being the consummate volunteer, and I'll now turn it over to you and your team.
Great. Well, thank you all, and thank you for having us here. We look forward to having this conversation. You're going to see that there's natural points during the conversation that we'll do some questions. Our meeting in 2 weeks is really geared towards those questions, and we will lay that out for actually you overall. But first, I do want to do a intro of two people that I'm very proud of in tons of ways, right? Lauren Ibarra, she's a resident down in Texas. Lauren worked for me for quite a while, and with Lauren, I think I hired Lauren 3 times over the last 10 years. So, as we look at recommending and advocating and also sponsoring, I can't think of a better person than Lauren to do that for. Lauren, last year, or a little before COVID started a brand new job. And in that job, she advocates and sponsors for our business dining group down in the Texas area. And the accounts she serves are from 10 employees to actually thousands of employees, but where we're resident, like Adele down in the South, where we're resident. And she advocates just not for the clients, but also Aramark to come up with win-win. And that's one thing you're going to notice about Lauren today. She always looks out for you as people and also everybody. And the way she advocates, there is no one better. Next is Keely Costa. I'm not going to take credit for Keely. Actually, Lauren hired Keely over, it must be close to 2 years now, but but I'm not going to take credit for Keely. This is Lauren's, but like Lauren, Keely is quite an actual athlete. And the way I use that term is I can put Keely in any position, any experience, any environment, and I know she's going to win time and time again. Keely, at this point last year, joined us as a director, where she is my point of contact to my project management office. And we'll walk through today what does a project management office do? What is project management overall? And I can't, again, as I started, I can't be prouder about Lauren and also Keely. Keely, do you want to? Thank you. Just, we're not going to read these slides. This is really about giving you the high level trends and themes off of each slide. And we really want to leave time, especially in session 2, to come back, and there's burning questions that hopefully you leave this presentation with, and you think about over the next 14 days. But really, we're going to start off is, what is this thing called project management, right? You're going to hear us talk a lot about the art or even the science of it. We're going to talk about some of the institutions, or the Project Management Institute, PMI for actually short. We promise as much as possible to stay away from acronyms. You will see us probably catching ourselves as we do some acronyms. But again, we will actually go through that overall. Also, we will give you a taste for project and the great tools out there. Overall, tips for implementing a project management approach. And all of us are probably in secret project managers, either in or personalized, professionalized, and things like that. At the end, we will show you a form that we will put into the chat that we would like you to fill out. It's just a quick questionnaire of what you want to see and questions answered in session 2. But again, we will pause throughout this conversation and also throughout.
Yeah, and I would just advocate that please use the chat function to submit questions as we go along. We'll keep track. Keely and I will keep track to ensure that either we're answering them later in the presentation, or we address them at the end, or let you know when they're coming up in the next session. So great.
Great. So you're also going to notice we are not the first ones to ever talk about project management and what is a project. We will talk through again what is project management to actually us, what it can mean to you, and also things like that. So let's really start off with the definition of a project. It's really a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or even a result. The way I look at it and the way that I train my teams, there's bodies of work out there that are always worth doing. What are you, as part of this center of excellence conversation, what are you trying to do, and what are you trying to succeed in, where a body of work can back up that idea, where we put plans in place to back up that body of work, and where you can add people, process, program, and things like that. I know a lot of you, like me, even though I work for a pretty large organization, my team itself is about a team of 20, and I'm proud to say half of them I would call them project managers. And even with smaller amount of resources, the multiple hats that you wear within your companies, sometimes it's a little confusing in your head, and I think your head's spinning. We will try to give you a very pragmatic approach to do project management, and really, better yet, to achieve what you want to achieve overall. Okay, so I don't know about you, but today I feel like every other call, either through spam or through conversations or through calls, people are always talking about project management. And what is that? I will tell you that project management, when I joined the workforce, that term wasn't really out there. It was really meant to be within the technological space, within the construction space, but things like PMI, which Keely will actually go into in a bit, and things like that, you hear it every day. The way I, again, look at it is, how do I get that body of work, that idea, that solution done, and get the best out of people, get the best out of our processes, and best out of people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. It's all about getting the best out of them. And again, this is about the actual conversation. We will also talk about it as art and science as well. Thank you, Kelly. So when you look at the art and science, I talk about it in actually both ways. So in my project management office, I look at project management more of a technical skill, and that's more the science of it. And when we're opening up new accounts, which is the partnership activation space, it's called a lot of things, but if you think of it about like this, we're usually found in business dining places like a Dell, like a Comcast. We're found in sports places like the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm a Philadelphian, but I'm actually a Denver Broncos fan and also an Astros fan. It's definitely a weird story, but you find us as guests within our clients' houses, and as we're activating the services or onboarding who Aramark is, and onboarding it in a very collaborative way, that is really more the art of it. And if I don't say it once, I probably say it a couple times a day. When we look at the consumer, which could be you are our consumer during this conversation. When you look at the consumer, what am I trying to do with that consumer, and how do I either tweak my approach, or how do I tweak my process to really get that person on board with us as fast as possible? So even with the silences, as Keely is going to talk to, and Lauren, it's really, how do we get the best out of that out of that team, and how do we apply a very rigorous process to actually have it done overall? Okay, again, I'm not going to read this, but really, when we think about this, and so somebody started off by saying how we advocate at Aramark. The way we advocate is making sure that whatever we want to do, the actual best we can do it, we're advocating it through a very rigorous process. And as we're advocating it, as we're going down the field with it, if you will, that we want to make sure that we are advocating for our process owners or our business owners, you, ourselves, and make sure, again, I'll keep saying it, getting the best out of you and also the actual project itself. When you think about the negotiation, right? We all have to make choices. We can't do everything, right? There's a lot of stuff written on this. If I could do 3 things well every day, I am succeeding. But to negotiate to get the best people on your team, either through informal influence or even formal, it is really key. And having those open conversations, right? This is no different than hiring people, right? We want to make sure that we have the best person at the best place at the right time, right? There's really no difference. You're going to hear us talk about mitigation, and mitigation is just not about loss. It's about how do we do things better, and how do we learn within the moment to really make sure things go well, right? As we're in our business model, as we're guests within our clients' houses, we need to ebb and flow and pivot as fast as possible, because every environment is actually different overall. And then at the end of the day, you will see that when you put prioritization and focus to something, focus especially, most times you will win overall. Okay, we'll talk about the Project Management Institute. I'm not going to go through this. in depth, but we will overall. So like to be an accountant, to be a lawyer, we're not licensed as project management. There is a institute out there. There's something called PMI, which I explained a few minutes ago. If you're really interested in project management and more the science of it, not the art of it, I always recommend people see what they are signing up for, and is PMI a actual place for you? Myself, I'll be very honest, I am not part of the institute, and I have practiced project management for the last 25 years, and I've had a project management office since 2008, right? But we can always be those consultants with you. I put my name out there, as well as Lauren and Keely, to actually talk through that. Because do you really need to be certified? What needs to happen is success, and putting those bets, those small bets, those big bets in places where you will do your best overall. Again, you can Google this, or you can do some research. I'll be happy even during the session too, if there's questions, come back with it. Is it right for you? That's really a one-on-one conversation. Okay, let's talk about project stages and tools. I'm going to hand this off soon to my two colleagues overall. So a lot of words on this page. We will go as slow as fast as possible, but really what I want to introduce to you is the actual phases of a project. And this is also like if you were planning an event, if you're planning any places to actually celebrate. If you think about it within these buckets, there's the initiation phase, right? What am I trying to do? What is that scope of work? What is the body of work, right? Authorizing the work, right? Planning it. You're going to hear a lot about planning the work and also working the plan. It's really important. So as you're planning the work to really bring people with you versus just going at the work, which I know I have a MO of sometimes doing that. But at the same point in time, when I stop and breathe and think through it and plan the work, I know I'm going to get the best out of most people. After you're done planning, right? It's really launching, right? The work, the plan itself. Again, in all these tools, Keely and Lauren, where I should go through, you need to control the plan. You're going to hear a lot about scope creep, right? So those who've ever had anything done to their car or their houses, right? You know that you signed up for actually one thing, and all of a sudden the invoice and the bill and the change orders get more and more. But we will show you how we measure and how we show transparency to it. And then project close, right? We talked about in the beginning, it's a finite period. At the end of the day, is you want to look back and say, wow, I did something. I actually brought a lot of people with me, and that body work was actually done overall. So with that, let me hand you over.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. And before we go to the next slide, I think the biggest thing here is just understanding that with any process, right, you're always going to have stages within the process. You're going to have subtasks within the process. But the key here is that you need to align on what you're trying to accomplish. It allows you to have true transparency and collaboration throughout the entire project. And it really manages expectations, because no project kicks off perfectly. You're always going to have moments where you have to work through, potentially shift, change gears, determine if the scope is correct, or the definition of success is where we still want to head to. So really this continuum right here is just helping that vision become a reality. And if you do nothing else, and it's hard because I can't see your faces, and I'm assuming you're so engaged and literally just staring at the screen with all the intent and wonder that you could have possibly at this afternoon. But if you do nothing else, if you don't listen to the rest of this conversation, all you have to do is make sure you have a project charter, you have a high-level timeline, and you know how to break down the work. So if you have just one place to start, those are your 3 steps, right? Make sure you do these. And so we'll go into them in more detail, but I cannot stress enough that those are some of the key aspects of project management and how to ensure that you're going to be successful. So we'll jump into conception and initiation. So really what happens in this phase, right? The first and foremost, you have to define the scope, and you have to make sure that you have a formal authorized sponsor. So it's one thing for us to say, hey, we'd really like to start this project. We want to go ahead and start a new initiative. We have to ensure that senior leadership, yourselves, whoever that might be, is truly on board with what project we are going to accomplish, right? And we want to establish who our stakeholders are. So stakeholders aren't just the folks that we're going to be reporting out to. It could also be individuals that we're going to be working with throughout the project, subject matter experts. And in many cases, some of these stakeholders are going to be key individuals that help contribute to developing and approving the final project charter. The project charter really does have quite a bit of information included in it, and you want to ensure that all parties are aligned prior to moving forward. So I'll start with the project charter. The biggest pieces of the project charter are obviously establishing what we're trying to accomplish here. What are our goals? What milestones do we have to hit? Who's part of our team, stakeholders, as well as the team members that will actually be doing the work. How do you find success metrics, right? So success metrics aren't just, hey, we launched on, day 1, but they could also be on the actual product of that particular launch, or, and we don't even have to talk products here. We could just say simply, we managed to roll out a new organizational change. We communicated to everyone effectively. We managed to ensure that everyone was on board. There are other success metrics that you could determine that actually define if the project is on track. You're going to have your timeline and budget, which is obviously pretty straightforward. And then you really do need to identify what risks are out there, right? So with any plan, you have to determine where you could get hung up. And as long as you have those in the back of your mind, you've understood them, you understood what other key enablers impact your project, you'll be better able to manage the scope of what's defined, right? So we'll break this down a little farther, because I'm telling you the project charter, I cannot stress enough, is truly some of the most important steps you'll ever take in developing your project. So the first and foremost, again, understanding your goals and your business needs, but really having an objective statement, the what, the why, the who, the when, the how, the where. I'll tell you, a couple weeks ago, maybe even a few months ago, I told my husband, I want 3 small flower beds along my back fence. Well, what I said was 3 small flower beds, but what I had in my brain was actually 7 foot long, 2 feet wide, 3 feet deep flower beds. I intended for him to make them because I wasn't going to pay for somebody else to do it. He probably was going to need his brother to help him. I wanted to make sure it was done by Labor Day. I didn't really communicate all that. That's partially my project management skills. It's also partially maybe my sales skills with my husband anyway, right? So I had to make sure we were on the right track. But in reality, should we have sat down, we were to probably manage this project a little better. Look, they're done and they're beautiful, but I guarantee by the end, we weren't quite the happiest 2 individuals, but we got it accomplished. So that's the same with any project, right? Don't just say, hey, this is what I want to happen. I want some flower beds. No, we actually have to define what those look like, when they should be done. Do you just want flower beds, or you actually want them filled with things? You want to make sure they're done in time for your, party you're throwing, or whatever the case might be. You start defining what those milestones are and when you think you need to accomplish them. And really, you develop a project charter by doing a couple of things. You don't have 2 people in the room doing this by themselves. You need to make sure you're having some key meetings with stakeholders. You want to maybe even have focus groups with some subject matter experts and other individuals to ensure that the inputs of the enablers, the risks, the other things to consider are all part of this project charter. Once that's signed off on, your project is ready and raring to go, right? Now we can actually develop our plan and move forward. So if you think about just another piece of this project charter, it's actually understanding your team. So again, project isn't just, hey, I have a project manager and I have somebody who told me what to do, right? You actually have a few other inputs and key groups that need to partake in this process. So in Aramark and in our team, or my former team, right, with the PMO, but we always ensured that we had several key groups as part of our larger initiatives. We have a steering committee, and steering committees, although they provide, guidance and approval on some of the key aspects of our project, they can also ensure that our project is in line with everything else that's going on within the company. And that's really important to ensure that you have that. Your executive sponsor is someone who's going to advocate for your project and ensure that no matter what, we're going to make sure this gets done. They're going to scream it from the rooftops. They're going to move obstacles if they need to, or they're at the very least going to ensure that they're communicating in a way to steering committees and other functional leaders to ensure that your project has a lot of sponsorship, right? You have project advisors, as we've mentioned before. Some of those could be functional leaders. Some of those could have been those individuals that were part of developing the charter. And then you have a project owner and a project manager. And those two things are very different. And we'll give you some of the insights to those in the appendix when we provide these slides later. But understanding what those roles truly are is very important. A project manager can obviously help drive the work, but the project owner owns the project and the success of that project. And so it's important that you have somebody who is very intimately involved and a sponsor and clued into what's going on. They can't just sign off and say, okay, project manager, have at it. We got to make sure those two are aligned. Then finally, you have obviously work stream leaders. You can have work stream executive sponsors and a team and the subject matter experts I was mentioning. So understanding all those key players is a crucial piece to starting your project before you get started. So I should have said my brother-in-law was committed to a few weekends out of the month the last couple of months. I didn't. He was okay. I fed him dinner, but other than that, I should have thought through some of that. So we'll go to the next slide as we talk about stakeholders in general. Again, this can seem a little overkill in the sense of understanding all of your stakeholders, but when you know what their roles are, how they intend to be engaged, how they might impact or influence your particular project, positively or negatively, it's really important, right? This allows you to later determine what key aspects of the project need to be in place, maybe what performance metrics have to be communicated, and Keely will go into some of that later. But stakeholder management, which in my case was husband and brother-in-law management, right? But I had to make sure I was managing those stakeholders throughout the whole project. Managing your project is just as important as managing your stakeholders because they can make or break the success of an overall project. It also allows you to identify if some of your stakeholders maybe aren't committed or don't have the ability or the resources to give the project the attention, the time, and the sponsorship that's needed. And should that be the case, this is when you start to see if you need to switch gears, find a new stakeholder, understand where key players are going to be engaged. Then we'll move into one more is actually understanding who's who. Who does what, right? So the RACI is our last step. So with all of our stakeholders, with all of our team members, you have to understand who's responsible, who's accountable, who's going to be informed. And so there's this thing called a RACI, which I believe is on the next slide. And you've probably seen this in several versions, right? There's RASCI, there's RACI, I believe there's DRASCI. There's all sorts of different ways you can determine this, but the kind of simple one to understand is RACI. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And so as you work through the steps of a project, defining the scope, defining the budget, determining who needs to be part of key collaboration steps, how do we need to understand the industry and the trends of the industry, any other key pieces of it, you can start to identify where people fall within those categories. Now, I'll tell you this, accountable is the person who is accountable for ensuring that task gets done. And yes, Ray, I said it wrong yesterday, so I'll go ahead and say it on recorded film. You can only have one accountable party, only one. So between me, Ray, and Keely, Ray's accountable and that's it. So he is to ensure that whatever task has to get done, whether he's doing it or not, it actually happens. The responsible party, although you can have a couple, I would argue as a project manager, it's very important to ensure you have one person that you're talking to that's getting that task done and you help support them in determining who else works with them. But responsible party actually does the work. A consulted party, again, subject matter experts on occasion, or maybe even your senior leadership, right? So other individuals that you need to consult during that part or phase of the project is important so that they can provide any sort of input or understanding of things that might be impacting you outside of your project. And finally, informed is just you're telling them you're on track, you're letting them know where you are, and you're moving on to the next direction. So again, there's other aspects of this. You can look online. There's a Ray CVS, which has, who's going to verify that task, who's going to actually sign off on that task. You could have a driver. You have several other aspects of this. We tend to stick to the one that's the simplest to allow everyone to understand who's doing the work, who needs to make sure it happens, and then the other two just simply are part of the process. All right. We'll move on into planning.
All right. Hey, everyone. This is Keely now. So we're going to talk about some of my favorite parts about the project management overall, which is defining and planning. So you've already got your objective statement that you worked on for the charter. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to help? When do we need to have it done by? How much money do we have to get it? So using Lauren's planter box example, which she and I did not coordinate on this, but I was actually going to use something very similar when I was talking through my part of the section here. So I'm excited that she keyed up for that. But what you're going to do in the project planning is basically say, okay, we've got to get all this stuff done. Let's build a plan and let's start to build out the steps to figure out how we're going to do that. So you're going to create and maintain a workable plan to accomplish the purpose of your project. Usually at the very beginning, you start kind of high level with what are the big steps, and then you break it down with what I'll go into on the next slide called a work breakdown schedule, and then a RAID log. And big part of any part of project management, Ray talked about the art and the science. The art is people, anything you're dealing with people management, you have to communicate, over communicate, and then communicate again with things. So Lauren really needs to nag her brother-in-law and say, hey, you promised you're going to help me with those planter boxes, and then tomorrow you're going to come over and help with those planter boxes. So you want to make sure you get a communication plan set up as well. So let me switch screens here. Okay. So there's a lot on this slide, but I'm going to unpack it kind of slowly. So stay with me here. What I typically do when I'm working on what's the overall goal? So the overall goal is to put planter boxes in Lauren's backyard. So that's the key step. So then what are the pieces we need to do to break that down? Well, first, if we're going to do raised planter boxes, we probably got to get some wood. We got to figure out what we're going to do for dirt. So we would have those as my big steps and then break those down into little smaller pieces. So what kind of wood do we want to get? So maybe we need to research what's in stock since everything's backed up in supply chains right now. And then from there, maybe you're going to decide, okay, well, we're going to need to cut the wood. And one thing you can keep track of in a project plan is what we call a dependency or a predecessor, which would be the order that things need to get done in. So if you're going to cut the wood, you may have that as one of your steps and then realize we should probably measure before we cut, because Lauren probably wants her planter boxes to be about the same size and have have equal sides and not be too wonky looking. So let's go back and add in before we cut the wood, we're going to want to make sure we measure where we're going to put the wood, then measure the wood, then measure again. Isn't that the law of contracting is to make sure you measure 5 times and cut once or something like that. So we'll make sure we get all of those little steps documented in the project plan. Then once we have a pretty good handle on what the steps are, or even while you're doing it, you can fill in who's going to do it. So is Lauren's brother-in-law going to get the wood, or is Lauren going to go out to Lowe's on her own and pick out the wood that she likes and pick out the paint for it that she likes, and kind of what the timeline is. So Lauren's got to get the wood first. So we're going to set that up and say, if she does that on Monday, then maybe they can paint the wood on Tuesday, and you can get an overall idea of what your timeline is. You also want to decide how granular you want to make your project plan. So in some project plans, you need to track every single little detail depending on who your audience is. So if Lauren's car needs to have gas put into it before she drives to Lowe's, maybe we need to drop that in. If it's just a higher level where you say get supplies, which would be your wood, your screws, your saw, anything else you need, you could do all of that in there as well. If it's a bigger project, obviously something bigger than a garden box, you'd want to track the duration for how long does it usually take to get some of these things done. And its duration is how long is it going to take you to physically do the task, but it may also be if you need to go through 5 stages of approvals, what's the overall timeline to get something done. So again, I know there's a lot on this. You will get a copy of this after, so you can read some of the finer points on here. But the next important thing you want to do, and this slide has one of my favorite quotes on it about project management, that everyone has a plan,
So like Keely said, you measure 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So that's what you've pretty much done. You've thought about your project, you've done the project charter, you created your overall process, you know all your stakeholders, you even know what might hang you up later. And now you actually get to start. You get to launch the project. And this is huge, right? Everybody's excited when you're finally getting started, right? This is your chance to actually carry out the deliverables. Our PM is going to make sure we're managing the resources and monitoring progress. And there are potentially quite a few aspects of this. Usually we assume launch is just, okay, I'm going to use my project plan. But really, we need to ensure that we're, again, communicating what we are going to accomplish. And we're constantly connected with our project team to ensure that this process moves forward in the right manner. The other thing that I think tends to be an area where people fall short is this resource drive that we talked at the bottom. So in many cases, and I'm sure we've all been there, we've said, haven't we done a project like this before? I really wish we could have go back to this other project and find, I know we've put together a PowerPoint like that before. I know we've engaged with these particular vendors before. I'm sure I have those quotes, but if you had a resource drive, I mean, at the very least, just dump it all into one folder that everybody has access to, then that's fine. If you actually have the ability to manage, hey, these were process documents we started with, these are all our vendor contracts. This is actually the document we sent out to our clients and customers when we started to launch. Having aspects like that allows you to not do the same work over and over and over again. Because just like I tell all my children that they're very special and unique and individual, I tell all my projects that too. But in reality, there's a lot of commonalities and similarities between projects and process and how we execute things. So don't make it harder on yourself later. So launching, you need to make sure you do that right by starting off and kicking off your project. How many of us have probably, which I can't see your hands, but I'm going to assume if you raise your hands or put here in the chat, we've been part of a project, yes, that never really officially kicked off. And all of a sudden, 6 months down the road, you're like, what? That's probably how my brother-in-law felt. He didn't even know he was part of a project until he was like halfway through building these flower boxes. But in reality, we need to kick off a project properly, right? And so this is something that PMs really stand by, because we all assume, our project owners even say, oh, I've had all those conversations. People know what they're supposed to do. Let's just get the cadence started. No, let's make sure we start from the top. We're going to define success. We don't have to go over the project charter in great detail, but we're going to explain what our objective and our goals are and what's in and out of scope so that everybody on the team understands when they get a request, they're on the same page, right? We're going to talk about the timeline of the project and the importance of communicating if that timeline is not going to happen, as well as potentially even the budget, right? We're going to talk about roles and responsibilities so that everybody's on the same page. I mean, it's just like going on a road trip or the first day of school when the teacher's talking to all their students. You have to make sure everyone understands the rules and guidelines by which we should abide and what success looks like in the end, right? And then we'll set up a true cadence of communication, because we can't assume that you kick off a project and everybody just knows, okay, see you in 3 months. I really hope that we get this done and let me know how you're doing and if you need any help, right? That's not how it works. So always communicate when the next time you'll be meeting. And if at that time you need to ask for some decisions or deadlines, project managers are pretty good at doing that too. So when are you going to get that by? What's the next step in that process? Always make sure you're asking questions to get commitments to what's happening next. I cannot stress this enough. And then finally, we have, I think, just a communication cadence, right? So there's different groups need to talk to each other at different times. And so we have a cadence that we have on our next slide here, and you'll receive too, where it shows us Who is attending what meeting? How often should those meetings happen? What's the goal of that meeting overall? And we ensure that these things happen in order to keep progress moving forward, or to allow the oh shoot items to bubble up and really be on our RAID log if we absolutely need them. So I highly recommend putting together what your cadence of communication would be when you do have a project. It just allows everybody to be on the same page. You can always scale back, but it's really hard to get everybody on the same track when people start saying they're too busy. And then finally, celebrate the launch. Hey, this is a huge step. We're halfway done, right? We started it. Now all we got to do is make sure it actually happens. So ensure that you celebrate and get people motivated so they'll want to finish the process.
All right. So now that you've got things up and running and your project has kicked off and things are going underway, you want to make sure you're monitoring what's happening. You're probably going to have some changes that come up in the project plan where we realize we didn't think about the flowers that are going to go into the flower box. So now we have to add some sections on plants and researching which plants need sun and which need shade and where things are going to go. So you want to make sure that we're tracking anything that gets added on that's kind of within the scope of what the overall project is, but also monitoring the progress of, okay, we've got the boards, we've got them cut, we're starting to put them together. What's the next step? So some of the things we're going to do are monitor and update the project plan. We're going to create status reports and custom dashboards and data visualization. So on my next slide here, I know it's kind of tiny, but if you look at the kind of overall look on this, on the right and left, I have two different samples of dashboards that we've built to track some of our projects within the Aramark world. And what I like to do with dashboards when I'm creating them is it's kind of a roll up of what the overall project status is. So I want it to be something that you can look at, and within the first 30 seconds or 2 minutes of looking at it, you get a good sense of what the project is, what the status is, and kind of what the major milestones or things you need to see right away are. I like to try to make my dashboards personally as using icons or using charts or using visuals and make them as engaging as possible. For some reason, I think when people hear the term project management, they think of lots of Excel spreadsheets and things of that nature. And if they hated Excel for most of their life, they're probably going to be a little timid to go into a project plan and try to make updates or see what's going on. But if you add some icons to it, it makes it look like your iPhone and you're like, oh, let me click on team and see who's working on this project. So I try to do it as kind of a visual. Don't be afraid to go in. I tell people when they're looking at my dashboards, there's nothing you can break that I can't fix. So go in, poke around, see what's there, get comfortable with it, because I want people to be really comfortable with reading the reports, with understanding what's going on. And one thing we haven't totally addressed yet is adaptability, which is really big in our PMO shop. We try to customize our reports, our visuals to what the needs of our project owner are. So what they want to see is what we give them on the high level. So the dashboard that I have over on the right side of the screen, we're working on several different human resources projects at once. And the project owner didn't want to go into the project plans on all 4 of them. He said, can you just give me like 4, 5, 6 boxes on what I need to know about each one every week? So we automated this so that he can come in, he can go see what's going on with all those projects without having to get into the nitty-gritty details of every single line. So for this, it's kind of what's the important roll up? What do you want to show at the high level? You know, especially these days, everyone has such a short attention span. So if you only had them for that kind of elevator pitch project status report, what do you want to show at that high level? And then you can always do the deeper dive by clicking into things and reviewing the project plan. So next up, I have what I call the Monday morning report. We, in the program we use, have the ability to automate. So what I have this project do, and we actually do this with a lot of our projects, is to every Monday morning at 7 a.m., we have the project plan automatically publish what's coming up this week or what's overdue as far as decisions and project tasks. And that gets emailed as a PDF, just like you see on here, to anybody who, well, we set who the distribution list is, but it's basically to the project owner and any of the key stakeholders. So when they open up their email Monday morning, they know these are the things I need to look at in the next 5 days or the next 14 days for this project in order for it to come up on time. And there'll be a link to the actual project plan. So if they need to make changes, bump out some dates, things like that, we can go in and take a closer look and see what's going on. But it kind of keeps it top of mind. Again, it's that communication and that reporting and making sure everybody knows what the status is, if things are changed, along that lines. Now, this is a Gantt chart. This is a little bit zoomed in approach to the project plan I had up a couple slides earlier. And this goes into what I was referring to with the dependencies and the predecessors. The example on screen here is about a survey that we're actually starting to build. And you can see that first we had to figure out what the questions were going to be. Then we had to build it in the platform. Then we had to test it, pilot with a few stakeholders. On the right side of the screen, a Gantt is kind of a fancy timeline that breaks up in little rectangular blocks. How much time is it going to take to do this? What's the overall timeline for the project on here? And these little arrows that you see are pointing to, this is a dependency. If you can't build it in the platform until we figure out what the questions are, because you wouldn't have anything to put in the platform. So this shows you, I know it can be a little intimidating if you're looking at it at first, but basically just think of a Gantt chart as a fancy timeline that helps you see the overall big picture for what the project is, where the holdups are. If you shift a date on one, how that's going to affect the overall progress for everything else that you need to get done throughout the life of the project. The next thing I want to talk about is how you track what you're doing. So if you've got 500 items or 10 items or however many tasks you have to get done within your project plan, you want to be able to track how far you've come. You know, part of it is we celebrated once we launched and we had our little arrow rocket flying across the screen. You also want to keep track of how far you've come with a lot of things so that you can celebrate the small victories. And you can also see what things are coming up as overdue. So I've got on screen here 3 different examples of way we track completion in some of our project plans. And it can be pretty simple of, have we started it? Has it not been started? Do I need to look at it? Is it at risk or is it done? So that's one of the more basic ones. The one in the middle, you can see there's a crazy formula we've got at the bottom that tracks by, if it's due within 7 days and it's not at least 80% done, then mark it as deadline approaching, or overdue if it's due today. And that one's a little more complex way to track it. We use that on some of the bigger plans where it's too hard to just kind of skim it at a sense and get what the overall status is. And this calculates up as a percentage. So you may end up something like, well, this is 32.5% done, but it gives you, you know, the pie chart, as I was talking about the visuals, helps paint that picture of how done are we really. And another easier way to do it is to figure out if you wanted to mark something more in quarters using Harvey balls for, has it been started? Is it at least a quarter done? Is it at least 50% done? Is it at least 75% done? Or is it done? So that's a simpler way to keep track if you've got fewer tasks to manage. We also use this if we're rolling out what I call deployment, where if we have one brand or one concept, we're rolling out to many different locations at once. And we want to see for all, 12, 15 locations, how many of the tasks are at least 50% done for the 5 stages of deployment. So depending on what your reporting needs are, there are lots of different options. But the big thing you want to do is just keep track of what's done, what's coming up, what's overdue, what do you need to focus on to make sure that you don't lose sight of the big deliverables, especially with anything that has one of those dependencies where, if Lauren's got her whole crew in the backyard ready to start the flower boxes and nobody got the wood, like you'd want to know that that's overdue, because then you'll be behind task and rescheduling things. And, once we get the wood built and we can start planting the flowers, you want to celebrate that of, hey, we're 50% done with the project. So these are some of the ways you can track completion there.
Awesome. All right. And there were a couple of questions, actually. Will you flip back just really quickly to make sure everybody from the last slide? Harvey balls are the balls down that you saw at the bottom right that kind of have that pie. You're right, Cheryl, the pie chart, but it's just another image of how to do it. And look, in reality, and Cheryl, you asked another question about what do you use to communicate? In all reality, it matters what makes sense for the team. Because if people don't use the project, which Keely can attest to, right? As a PMO, we have to be savvy enough, but as well as just flexible enough to say, look, if you're all about checkboxes, let's stick to checkboxes. If you like to know it started, it's behind target, or it's done, then let's just do that. So I think it's really understanding your team, because your project will not be successful if you don't have the information as to where you really are. And so a lot of times we just ask that during our process to say, what makes sense for you? It can be overwhelming. Keely and I geek out over that middle section. Let's make all sorts of formulas so I don't have to think very hard. And when somebody asks me a question, I just go and it's there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that makes sense for everybody. I'm all about crossing it off my to-do list also. So if that's how it works for you, then make it work. The only other thing I'd add with some of the questions that were coming up is, don't forget to add a task that maybe wasn't included in your project plan if it's incredibly important to document. So sometimes that has happened in the past. We do a project, and I'm guilty of it even just on my own to-do list. Sometimes if I don't feel like I'm accomplishing a lot, but I did do something today, I might add it, cross it off. Ordered groceries. Yeah, do that every week, but I'll still write it down. It's the same concept, right? So make sure that if you need to document it, you need to add it, even if it's after the fact. If it's something you're going to do again, if you need the history, make sure it's included. All right, we're now on to project close. And I know we have about 25 minutes, so we'll ensure there's a little more time for questions. But just like the project opening, how many of us have been part of projects where they just kind of fade away and everybody goes, oh, I guess we're not doing that anymore. I don't know. Nobody asked me about it for the last 3 months. So I guess we're done, whatever that might be. Closing out a project is just as important as starting a project, right? So the biggest thing for closeout is ensuring with stakeholders, did we actually meet what we said we were going to do? Or if we didn't, is that okay? Has the company moved on? Has this group moved on? And that happens, and that is okay. We'll celebrate all the work we've done, but it's all right to say that this project has come to a close. We just want to make sure everybody's aligned with closing out what we did. We started by saying projects are temporary, right? So closing it out makes it officially a temporary thing that goes away. Because Keely and I have also been on projects that basically make you feel like you're just now part of this new team. You have 2 jobs, you'll stay with us forever. So having a closeout is incredibly important, and maybe even checking in to say, I think we're getting to close. You guys can take it. We're going to transition it off. You guys are rocking and rolling. We'll move from there. So again, it's transitioning off the program management and turning it over to the program owners. And you need to celebrate success, right? You need to celebrate what happened. So there's a few things you can do. You can have lessons learned, a post-mortem meeting, a project close form. So a couple reasons these things are important. A lessons learned or project close, you kind of see both there. No, that's okay. Next slide. You have both forms. So there's a project closeout. Did we complete the work? You're just kind of documenting, yes, we did it. It worked well. Here are some things that, were benefited from it. Was it over budget, under budget? I mean, I've worked for Ray, or I did work for Ray for almost 10 years. And I guarantee having my file of things we did 10 years ago was incredibly important. And so knowing those details and having an archive is good. So doing a project closeout like this allows you to just have it in one place. A lessons learned aspect allows you to do a few things, right? So it's not just about the project. It's about developing people, making sure that we're actually engaging with our teams well. We understand what worked or what didn't work, because I guarantee you're going to work with those same individuals again, whether they be stakeholders, functional leaders, et cetera. So as a project team, it allowed us to develop our team a little bit better, develop our tools and our processes better. It actually can allow you, as Keely mentioned, when we have things that roll out. So we've had several projects that we had phase 1 rollout, phase 2 rollout, phase 3 rollout. The project might not be closed, but having these milestones where we did lessons learned allowed us to do the next phase just a little bit better, right? And no matter what that was, gathering data, defining success, measuring, tools and success and data points afterwards, all of those things are incredibly important. So I cannot stress enough that knowing when you start and knowing when you end and how you did it is very, very important. And with that, we're coming to the end of our presentation here. So Ray, I'll pass it to you. And I think we have about 20 minutes-ish.
And we're going to leave time for questions overall, right? But I do want to go back, Kelly, if you can go back one slide, if you don't mind. The one thing that Lauren kept saying, right, was make sure that you do certain things. One of the things that, as personal and as professionals, I see all the time, we document it, and sometimes that means that you're putting it into a file. That is not the case. It is publishing it, right? It might be a small group. I think Lauren talked about forums and things like that. It might sound quite obvious, but I will tell you, over my career and others, people document or they don't, but then they don't publish, right? And what happens is, as Lauren said, to actually start, I think I did a project once. Well, I bet you actually did, and here is the learnings. Or I spent time with that actual process owner or even business owner, and that person likes things in 4 different ways to communicate, just not through a Skype or an MS Teams. There's different ways that to actually do that. Thanks, Kelly. So, implementing a project management approach, right? We will go through this, but it's really all of us today. We're all multitasking. We're all going into different mediums. But I bet you, each one of you, the way Lauren described those flower boxes, or even though those flower beds, we're all non-project managers managing projects. I think of my kids, who I think I'm their project, and also vice versa. That there is a lot, right? But at the end of the day, it's really setting your eyes on something, getting something done, telling people what you did, and really move on to the next project overall. So, again, you can read this. Creating a plan does not have to look like one of Keely's plans. One of the things that Lauren did for me is, from a succession planning standpoint, is to have a Keely. But if you're just documenting it, writing it down, and publishing it, no matter what that looks like, if you're a firm that uses Excel, if you're a firm that uses something else, all I'm telling you is just make sure that you're getting the best out of people, and they know what to expect overall. Okay, so we talked through all of this, right? I think between now and the second sessions, there's going to be some questions, right? And we always get the question, well, there's 10 things here, there's 12 things. What are those things that you want to convey to your audience here? I will tell you this, I want to convey all of it, but really it comes back to, and I know Keely said this and Lauren said this, communicate well and often, and check in, right? There was the question that, what tool do you use to do that? I'm the type of person that I probably need it in 3 different, either through a PDF or through a dashboard or through Keely telling me certain things. Just make sure you are communicating, and just not to yourself. Again, it's obvious, it's actually a laugh, but at the same point in time is, when you expect something, you actually measure it, and you tell the person what they did well, what could be done better, and really move it on, right? And at the end, this is all about staying calm and sane. We're going through a lot, over the last 24 months as people. And really, when I look at people like Akili, Lauren, my wife, my kids, staying calm and staying sane, that's what this is about. And one that's not on here, have fun, right? I'm not sure if we've conveyed this to this conversation, but I know I like Lauren and Keely a lot. I'm not going to ask the same question back, but have fun, right? At the end of the day, there's only so many hours, and there's so much good work to be done. Just prioritize the work, focus on the work, and at the same time, have fun and calm and sane.
Perfect. So I think we had a pop quiz here. So, just take a stab at it. Do you know some of these items? Maybe you already have a project plan in mind. Would you be able to answer at least 3 of the 10 here, maybe 5 of the 10? And if you haven't, maybe this is your opportunity to ensure that you're going back, taking this kind of pop quiz to yourself and saying, okay, I really think this is a project, and I think we need to outline a few more aspects of it to ensure that we can get to the next step. Or make sure this project that's already been going, that never had an opening, and that we're not really monitoring, actually is successful in the end. I think we want to we have about 15 minutes left. So I think we want to allow for a couple of things. Oh yes, Keely, I'm adamant about this, but Keely was like, we're putting this in here twice. And so really the aspect is, make sure that you have a kickoff. If you have a project in mind, if you're starting something, maybe you're even halfway done, right? But you actually never kicked it off. It's never a bad time to say, let's take a moment to actually ensure we all understand what we're headed for, headed towards. We know what our in scope and out of scope is. Has that changed? What's our timeline, et cetera. Really kicking off a project can be one of the biggest either benefits or downfalls of any project, truly.
And I think to add to that, sorry to jump on you, Lauren, but
Yeah.
I think it's also important, like you said, when you're partway through the project to kind of regroup and take a look at your charter again and see if you're still solving the same problem, or has the problem evolved? Is what you originally were setting out to do still what you're focused on? And if it's shifted, are there things you're forgetting to do that you had originally documented? So kind of getting back and, doing almost a mid-project check-in, similar style to the kickoff, to just kind of re-engage everybody and get away from the working the work pieces to more of the, okay, let's look back at the big picture and make sure we're still solving the right problem.
Awesome. We had
Yeah.
a great question, but I'm going to actually say I'm going to tease it, because that is definitely part of our next session. It's Keely, you were talking about it, and they asked, there's, it always feels like there's so many different opportunities for new projects. How do we prioritize what projects we work on first? And I think we're definitely covering that in the next session. So I'm going to tease you, and you better show up. Go ahead, Ray.
No, so we're gonna, if we haven't done this already, we will drop this in the link, and really, what we want to really do is make sure that this session or next session is successful for you, and getting through what topics would you like to address. It can be as complicated or as simple as possible, and it always goes that if you were thinking about it, I'm sure someone else is thinking about it, right? And then practicing what we actually speak about, right? What lessons learned, right? We want to know, how can we get this information over better to actually you, right? I want to thank Natalie Santos for having us on, but it's really about you and you winning. I love the one, I think it was Matt, is win-win coffee. I think I said that right. It's all about winning, right? And it's all about moving this forward. So we really want to know your feedback. And this team here, myself, Lauren, want to talk about your feedback so we can adjust, right? This isn't rocket science. This is a whole lot of fun. Lauren and Keely talk about geeking out. I geek out on a lot of things in my lifetime. But again, we will drop this in, and the way we're going to measure success is how these come back and how we in session 2 answer these, and at least give you a roadmap or what that next question is. Lauren?
Definitely. No, I added the link into the chat, and we had another great question. Just so again, we're open now to any questions you might have that are related to the things we discussed today. If it's something that we think might be beneficial for the next session, we'll tease it up for that. But Angela, you asked, what are some examples that are considered out of scope? And I'll just give you an example in the sense that you have to define what success looks like. So let's say we're making a coffee cup. Right. So I have my coffee cup or my flower beds. We're making my flower beds again because they're beautiful. I'll have pictures next time. So my whole, vision of success was actually having 3 flower beds filled with dirt and rock and whatever else needed to be there, plus my lattices that I, painted, plus adding all my plants. But for my husband, it was just to build those stinking flower boxes, and that was it. Like, he was done. He didn't want to do anymore, right? So I think you have to define success first. If it was similar, I need to create a coffee cup, maybe out of scope would be, I don't want to make thousands of these and distribute them. I just wanted to make one and make sure it works and it doesn't have holes. It's made out of something specific. So you really have to know, like, what does success look like? And ask the questions, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? Is it that we just need to deploy an app? Does that app actually have to be flexible and have additional, components to it? Or is it simply that we just want people to be able to type in their name and tell us where to send them a gift bag? If that makes sense, you got to kind of work through what success looks like and then ensure after that if it fits within that bucket. And asking all those who, what, where, when, why, how will let you know if it's in or out of scope.
And I think, Lauren, to get back to your flower box example, if while they were in the backyard and they're working on flower boxes and you were like, hey, while you're here, maybe you should paint the fence and paint the house and clean up the compost pile and do all that other stuff. That's what we call scope creep, where it's outside of what you had originally asked for. And maybe if they have time to tie some of it in, if they're painting the lattice anyway, they could paint the fence behind the lattice. But, that it's anything that wasn't really in your original plan that adds additional work that's not towards the end goal or success or results that you were looking for.
Exactly. I had to get my own flowers and plant them. That was out of scope for my husband. Any other questions? I don't see any others coming through. All right. Well, we'll pass it back to either Christine or Natalie or Melissa. We really enjoyed this and we appreciate you taking the time to fill out that link so we can make sure that the next session is just as engaging as this one.
Wonderful. Is anybody sure we don't have any more questions? We still have up to 45. This is a great opportunity to ask any questions or even just comment. I myself have been on several project management presentations, and this, I would have to say, it was great because it provided not only speaking points that were great, but the visuals. I think visuals are very important, especially when it comes to project management and the visuals of different styles and different learning styles. So Lauren, even as you gave the example of what that success looked like for you in your head and what it looked like to your husband, right? I'm just doing the boxes. No, I want it to be completely full. And that is a really good example of how many people on a project can have different ideas of success, what that looks like. So thank you for bringing that up. We have a question from Dora. She said, is there a way to document the expenses by subtracting one at a time, maybe?
Probably, yeah, from the budget
total.
total. We definitely can provide a budget template. I believe we have some, and so we'll make sure that those are included in some of the things we can provide to you. And again, it just depends on what you're looking for, right? Like if your construction budget, sometimes it's based on, again, like how much wood did I need and all that kind of thing, and where did I buy it from, et cetera. But yes, we can provide you with a very simple budget template. For sure. And then somebody else asked, how many, and Cheryl, this is a great question. And I think we'll get into it probably even a little more detail in the next one, but it was how many attendees are small businesses? And I think many of you are, where you are all of the people in the project. And I would say that sometimes even as PMs, we can feel that way, right? So projects can feel overwhelming. And although, yes, those flower boxes were definitely my vision and what I wanted because it makes me happy, I had to solicit the help and support from others. And so we can talk about, or would be happy to even discuss kind of your particular situation and how do you actually, again, influence without formal authority. How do you get folks to come and join you on a project? How do you kind of sell them on the success of that project? Maybe not only for yourself, but for you. So I think it's definitely understanding how to rely on others, whether that's within your organization or potentially even finding, individuals outside of it to help support.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, and I also want to go back to this question about from a small business standpoint. If you think about what our business model is, right, is we're standing up a service. Part of my team is standing up a service on site, and really, that's really a small business when you think about it. I'll tell you, of late is when we're dealing with projects that are fun, growth projects, right? The company wants to grow. It is growing. We actually have the other issue that there's so many people that want to be involved in the project. Part of my job is saying, what are you trying to be on this project for, and what are you going to do, right? If it's just to say yay and shake and shake some of the trees down, that's one thing. But really be selective and make sure that you have the best of your team. It's easier to say, but as part of our job is to develop people as well.
I see a few more questions, and I'm just going to make sure we kind of address a couple of them in the last 5 minutes here. So one of them actually was, are there any project management tools you would recommend? There are several out there. Again, I think it really depends on what works best for your team. So we actually, Keely threw them up on the screen. So there are several that, are PM tools that you can use. That actually already answers the how do you work paperlessly. Several of these are online. They don't actually, they're pretty reasonable in terms of cost, depending on the size of your team. But you have to use what works and makes sense for you as the person managing the project and for those that are actually working within the project. One of the other questions was, how do you what's the best practice for holding stakeholders accountable if they are unreliable? And I would say it's a couple of things. The first is stakeholder report outs. You have calls, you're kind of talking through it, you need to ask for what their opinion is or asking for decisions. Usually when we have a stakeholder meeting or let's say a steering committee, we started off by saying, what I need from you by the end of this meeting is a decision on X, and if they can't get it to you, but you're actually asking more direct on what you're needing in support of, their sponsorship. Report outs, we've had call outs before of like, here's what we're asking of you, whether it be forgiveness as we're a little bit late or the Monday morning report, what do we need, right? The other thing is you have to have those executive sponsors. Your project owner, your executive sponsors can help work with those stakeholders. And in reality, if you have one that's not working, we're so glad you were part of the team. It seems like you're incredibly busy with a lot of the work that you have going on. Do you have somebody else that you can assign to this project in order to help both of us kind of work it out? So I think that's some of the things to work through.
Well, Lauren, also what you just said, right, is very important. Don't throw people under the bus, right? How many times in your lives, personal or professional, if somebody would have said to you, it is okay not to be on this project, right? Having that candid, very, very disclosed conversation, it takes the weight off, just not off of the project. It also takes the weight off of that person, and they see it as a win, right? Don't ever dismiss the one-on-one conversations. And also, right, one of the things that we've learned to work more virtually, I still have my whiteboards, which is my ultimate project management tool, right? So, but the idea is to present those in a very virtual form, and we can get through those questions during session 2.
Awesome. All right, I think that's it. Melissa, you're on mute if you're talking.
I was just making sure people were paying attention and engaged still. I know we're at our final 2 minutes. So again, we would like to thank Ray and Keely and Lauren for this excellent presentation for Project Management Part 1. I know there's a lot to digest, so we're going to actually send the link for the recording so that everybody can digest. And if for session 2 you have any questions, we can come prepared with that. So session 2 will be September 28th. It will start with the presentation from the team here, and then it will go into your breakout sessions with the executive coaches and the mentors. Can we just give a round of applause and throw emojis and just, give them great visuals for giving us really great visuals for this presentation? Oh, we have a hand raised. Meg, if you want to let Vanessa, or we have multiple hands raised, so I don't know if that's a hand raise.
Maybe that's the emoji.
I think it's a thumbs up.
Okay. Well, thank you all again. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And if you have any closing comments, please feel free to say.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks.